STEM City USA Healthy Doses series is your passport to a balanced lifestyle. Hosted by Dr. Tiffany Anderson and presented in the Boston Scientific Auditorium. And now, Dr. Tiffany Anderson.
Welcome, and good morning, everybody. This is Healthy Doses, streaming live from the metaverse at STEMcityUSA.com. My name is Rayondon Kennedy, and I am honored to be your moderator each week. Healthy Doses is brought to you by Boston Scientific, and it's a show that we created to help you be the best you possible. And we do that by discussing important mental health topics each week. And so we couldn't do that without our host, Dr. Tiffany Anderson. Good morning, Dr. Anderson.
Good morning, Ray. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling amazing. How about you?
I'm feeling great. I am feeling great. So for today's episode, we will be covering empathy. It's one of those characteristic trait skills that we kind of assume folks may have or assume everyone should have, right? And so this episode is really kind of to give voice to empathy and how it kind of not only shows up in people's lives, but how we can work towards kind of building that skill, if you will, right? And so first, I want to just start with a few examples of everyday situations that may happen or have happened in each other's lives that kind of gives us a voice to empathy and what it may look like, right? So think of a time where you had a friend or someone you knew that, I don't know, was maybe being bullied in some way, right? So you're in the restroom at the school. One of the students is getting teased or pushed by other kids. Imagine you're a kid watching that interaction, right? Think about how you would demonstrate empathy. First, you want to remember what it's like to be picked on, right? Because we want to come from a place of lived experience if we can. So think about what it's like to be picked on or to be ostracized, right? To be teased. And then you may wait until the bullies have left or the kid is now out the stall. And now you can show up as a compassionate, empathetic person and take action by either reporting the bullies to an adult, encouraging the person to report the incident to an adult or someone in authority, right? So that's just one example how we can kind of utilize our empathetic skills to support someone else. Another example could be working with an overwhelmed coworker, right? This person has a huge amount of work that they need to do throughout the weekend. So you know the feeling of having a huge amount of work that's due, you know how it feels to be overwhelmed, right? And so here's another way you can practice your empathetic skills. Think about how bad that person may feel. Maybe on Saturday you show up by stopping by the office with some coffee or donuts, right? And providing this person some encouraging words. Maybe also think about, again, the way empathy works. Think about how you're connecting, how you're able to kind of show up in a vulnerable state with that individual and provide those encouraging words, because oftentimes with empathy, we recognize that it's a shared experience. And so think about that. Think about it doesn't have to look exactly like this, but think about times where someone was struggling and you showed up in an empathetic way, right? So after this commercial break, our sponsors, Boston Scientific, will jump right back into it.
welcome back. We have such a great show. I'm really excited to jump into this conversation. But before I pass it back to Dr. Anderson, I want to remind you that this is a live show. We're here to interact with you. If you have any comments, any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments section. There is a QR code that you see in the top right of the screen. If you're on a computer or if you're not on your phone, go ahead and scan that, and it'll get you to a portal where you can ask us questions. If you're in the chat room in STEM City USA, go ahead, drop lines, interact with the community that's watching in there. We'd love to hear from you. And so, Dr. Anderson, before we left, you introduced the topic. We're talking about empathy, which is one of my favorite topics. I often take these personality tests and these leadership quality test things, and empathy is always one of my strongest indicators, one of my strongest skills that show up there. So I'm really excited to kind of talk about this and kind of put some meaning behind it. But last night, your intro, you talked about the bullying. I watched a cool movie on Netflix. It's a documentary about Manti Te'o. And for those of you who don't know, Manti Te'o was this superstar athlete at Notre Dame who dedicated his season to this girlfriend who had passed away, and it was so inspiring. He went on and had a really great year, and it turns out after all of that, she was fake, and he experienced so much bullying. And I remember going, "This dude is crazy." I remember, all these negative thoughts about him at the time. Like, how could you not know? And then I watched this documentary, and like it put into perspective everything, and like I was able to see it from his perspective, like how it happened. I felt so bad. But like that empathy, like it really was touching, and like it put a whole new spin on it. And it was thinking about today's topic of empathy, and like how if just think about it and stop jumping to conclusions, you can really see things from a different perspective and really make it make sense and see that he was going through a lot, and the kind of person that he was kind of was the perfect storm for like him to get duped and get catfished into it. So I'm really excited to jump into the conversation. So let's start with this, Dr. Anderson. What is empathy?
Yeah, what is empathy? I'm gonna also chime in about that story. But empathy is one's ability to sense other people's emotions, right? Coupled with their ability to kind of imagine what someone is maybe feeling or thinking, right? And so this person is able to kind of recognize, understand, and feel the emotions of other people. It's also attached to one's emotional intelligence, right? And so it's this kind of quality to allow a person to take on another's perspective and feel what they are feeling, right? So that is empathy. So when you brought up that great example, and it's funny, right? Because I actually watched it too. I wasn't familiar with the story, right? So I don't have the connection with kind of like the lack of empathy personally. But what I do recognize is how quickly you're on top and how quickly someone can fall just by assumptions and perceptions, right? And so I think what oftentimes happens is we don't think higher of each other in a society. And so we kind of automatically went to a place where he was deceptive and not just the girlfriend that didn't exist, right? And so, again, another example of the importance of empathy, because what we saw in that documentary is the lack thereof and how it really impacted his life. And you can tell he's still pretty affected by it to this day, because it hasn't kind of died down. You know what I mean? He still is getting the looks, the stares, maybe not as often, but it still is tied to his identity, right? So another example why the show is important, another example why empathy is so important, because I don't think we realize the aftermath that it causes when we don't show up for each other.
Or the damage of the lack of empathy, right? The world crashed down on him and nobody thought about maybe what he's going through or how, we got here. And so hopefully this documentary helps. And hopefully, with this discussion can help some of you at home. And so, Dr. Anderson, when I think about empathy, you said it's tied to like your emotional intelligence, but is empathy, is it an emotion? Is it something that we all have? Is it like happiness or anger, or is it like a skill? Is it something that we can improve upon, practice and sharpen? Because, when I think about emotions, I don't have to practice being happy. I don't have to practice being angry. And so what is empathy? Is it emotion? Is it a skill? How does that shape up?
So the way empathy is understood, a lot of the research shows that it's like a genetic trait. So it may look more like sometimes it's kind of like you either do or you don't. And it's kind of inherited, right? And so it could be connected to one's like level of oxytocin. That's just naturally in their body. That's passed down throughout the generations. Some understand it as a skill. It is something that could be taught. We see it more taught generally. The hope is kind of taught as children, right? And so when we look at it as a skill, it's one of those things that, hey, if you accidentally push someone, that you apologize. Or if you see someone getting bullied, that you help them and stand up for them or get them the necessary support that they need, right? And so oftentimes with it, from a skill perspective, we're hoping that through our children that they are actively practicing it. But we also see in research that it is genetics, right? So, when we ask kind of like, why does one have it a bit more than others? A lot of the research shows that it's inherent. Some folks just have more of it. Some folks may just have less of it. And that's okay. That's okay because there's still ways of building it, attaining more of it, right? And learning how to kind of utilize it in one's life to support oneself and others, right? So it is an emotion, right? When I say it's an emotion, it's more of one that comes when connecting with someone else, right? And so to feel the other person's experience or perspective or put yourself in their shoes, that's usually where the emotion kind of shows up for you when it comes to empathy, right? And what that may look like.
Are there different types of empathy, or is it just all kind of one thing?
No, it's see the thing, it's different types. It's
Mhm.
different types. There's various kind of theories, right, about kind of all things when it comes to research. But with empathy, they do speak about three different types of empathy, right? So the breakdown is the first area is like cognitive empathy, right? So this is also known as kind of understanding one's perspective. So this type of empathy refers to our ability to understand the other person's perspective and identify right away how to react to their emotions, right? And so first is perspective taking, right? Where are they coming from and knowing how to react to that emotion right away. The next one is affective empathy. So this refers to how someone feels in response to the other person's emotion. Um, for example, if a person is like anxious about a major event, we're able to mirror that anxiety, right? That is affective empathy. Again, when I was talking about the emotion, the way the emotion shows up, we'll see that a lot more with the affective empathy. And then lastly, we have compassion empathy or compassionate empathy. This is the type of empathy that combines the cognitive, right, the first one, and the affective empathy, and it makes you want to help the person in emotional stress, right? So first, we have the perspective. We understand the person's perspective and we can respond to it. Next, we have the affective. We understand the emotional response and we can mirror how they're feeling. And then last, we combined it with the compassionate empathy, where we not only feel it and understand it, but we want to help them out of their distress, right? We want to show up for them. And so that's how they break down the three um, parts of empathy.
So, as we're talking about empathy, we defined it, we talked about the different types, but for the purposes of this show, why is empathy important?
Mhm.
Why is this an important skill? Why are we even having this conversation of even bringing it up? I know through the years, especially most recently, empathy has been kind of like a hot topic button, something that people are talking about, a skill It's in the zeitgeist of the times. So let's talk about the importance. Why is it important that we have empathy? How does this affect us in our everyday lives, and how does it hurt us if we don't have it?
Yeah. Personally, even as a mental health professional, I don't think empathy is one of those things that, again, I think folks assume everyone has, especially in helping professions. That shouldn't be assumed. Yeah. There's other qualities that are great, right? So I'm not saying like if you don't have empathy, you're doomed. What I'm saying is that empathy kind of help. It doesn't kind of. It is one of those experiences where we're able to meet others where they are without judgment, right? Where we're able to feel a person's experience and be with them, right? That is a beautiful experience with humans, right? That is the ability to connect emotionally. And so if you are having a difficult day and I'm able to connect with you and see you and understand you, you are able to show up in a different space because you know that you're not alone. You know that you are heard and you know that you are valued, right? We cannot underestimate that experience. And so that alone, when working with the various clients that I'm working with, having empathy, which is definitely a skill that I personally have, one that I saw growing up, especially through my grandmother and her interactions with everyone she encountered as a child, right? When we talked about that building, I naturally was taught that. Not that she had to take me by the hand and say, this is what it looks like. I just was in her presence. And being in her presence was enough for me to learn, oh, wow, this is how you treat human beings. Even the strangers on the street, even those that you don't may have less than you or that don't look like you, right? That you just naturally are kind and that you speak with them in a place of love and compassion, right? And so that is another piece of that kind of importance of empathy, just simply being able to connect with the human experience, right? And then next we have um, a lot of research that's going on, right? Where they're connecting ones like genetic connections to emotional intelligence, right? So it's important that we understand that some have it naturally, and some may need to build upon that skill. Healthy relationships require empathy. They require nurture, care, understanding in friendships and in romantic relationships, right? So if one is kind of lacking empathy, it won't really work after a while because one may be showing up emotionally and the other may not be, right? So that's a hard thing to kind of bridge together. And so, hence the importance. So, when people only think of their own interests, the other people in the relationship will suffer, right? And so that's again why we need to show up for each other and we need to make sure that everything's not about us, that it's not just about what we want, right? But that we are connecting with the experience and the emotions of other folk. Um, and then lastly, because I think of empathy on kind of a global scale, it's one of those things that as a society, Ray, we need more of. Uh,
Yes.
a great um, example um, of the lack of empathy is really when people of color speak about their racial identities and their racialized experiences in society, and others kind of debunk that or give excuses. That is a lack of empathy because although you may not have shared experiences, you are able to recognize that it's not about what I know or what I've experienced personally, but I'm able to connect with them emotionally and know that that experience is true for them, right? And that I'm never in a space to minimize that and to say that it's not true for you because no one gets to say that about each other's experience, right? And so, on a global scale, empathy is so necessary because we learned that outside of our experiences, people are still hurting and that we still need to show up for them and that we don't have to necessarily experience it one-on-one or hands-on or anything like that. It's simply being able to see someone suffering, feel that because we too know what suffering looks like, and then show up for them and utilize our own privileges to help others get past any type of afflictions that they're experiencing.
Yeah, this is amazing, and it's such an important conversation because like you were saying, sometimes it's genetic. I'm not sure why my empathy is kind of high, or why I score high when I do these, or whatever. But I do know the importance of it as applies to my life, because empathy is probably the thing that helps me build relationships the most. Being able to understand and kind of put myself in other people's shoes and empathize with whatever situation they're going through, good, bad, or indifferent. And I think that's helped me build the relationships that I've had or have in my life currently. Now, that is a huge help. Like you were just saying, like, we need more empathy in the world. And so that's something that I don't have to work on. But what if you don't? What if you're not, genetically predisposed
Mhm.
to having that? How do you build that skill, or sharpen that skill to help you in your everyday interactions?
Mhm. That's a beautiful caveat too. Um, or not even a caveat, but kind of an intersection into that question of like, so what now, right? Like, I want to work on empathy. I have some of it, but maybe not a lot. And this is a thing. When I think of characteristics, when I think of traits, because it is considered also a trait, recognizing, everything has like levels, right? So one person like Ray may be super high on empathy, but in other areas he needs to build, right? Um, no offense to you, Ray, but we all have levels, right? And so I'd say that to normalize it, not only for Ray, but for all of us. Like, if you are not a 10 on empathy, that is okay. You may be a 10 on actions, on like doing certain things, like or for loving, your, or generosity. That's really what I'm trying to say. That looks different than empathy, right? But that's also a beautiful trait and skill. So recognize it is okay to be human and have levels, because a lot of times we're just seeking balance. I think, for me, in my opinion, life is all about balance. And so I just want to normalize for those that may start kind of judging themselves in this moment. It's not for you to do that. It's just to recognize that if you want to continue to build that empathy, if you want to show up for yourself and others in a different way, continue to watch. And continue to be intentional about building that skill. So first, we really want to cultivate your curiosity. Remember when I was talking about folks making judgments about other people's experience? They don't know it for themselves, right? And so, even if it is your experience, we're not, as people, a monolith, right? So recognize that all our experiences are different. So we want to cultivate our curiosity. We want to spend time with people that we don't know well, right? That come from different backgrounds, different creeds. We want to ask them different questions. We want to know about their life, right? About their cultures, about their experiences. We really want to get outside of our own way, outside of our own biases, implicit biases that oftentimes kind of lay dormant until they show up. And so you want to get to know folks, ethnic background, their political views, their religious experience, their social interactions, right? Who they're spending time with. Like, that is really a way to really start to kind of increase your curiosity and get out of your own worldview, right? Because life happens outside of you. You want to be present with these people, these individuals. You want to recognize the subjects that make them happy, that make them feel joy, and make them feel sad, right? Next, you want to step outside your comfort zone. Remember, I said get out of your own worldview, because life happens outside of you. Naturally, we tend to kind of flock to folks with similar perspectives, right? Which is fine. But when we're talking about empathy and connecting with folks' emotions and experiences that oftentimes are outside of ourselves, we want to get out of our comfort zone. And you never know who's there that may not look like you, but you believe that are so different as humans. We even if they don't look like you, we are still experiencing so many similarities, believe it or not, right? We want to experience what it's like to be unable to do something or not know how to interact with folks where you are. So again, doing things that you've never done. That's all it's saying. Just get outside your comfort zone. Dive into things you've never done and be okay with being uncomfortable. That is life, right? You want to reach out for support when in need. That can be, again, uncomfortable, especially if you're a person that folks generally lean on for support. You too want to ask for support and be willing to receive that support. You want to be able to accept, again, when I say being uncomfortable, but also feeling helpless, because oftentimes it kind of humbles you in those moments, and it teaches you that there are experiences outside of yourself that you still need to learn. Yeah. Next, examine your biases. I was just saying that. Think about your biases. Think about where they're coming from, where you pick them up, right? And again, you don't necessarily have to be taught. You could be socialized to believe some of these things simply by being in this country, right? So examine your biases. Be more aware about how you are judging others. Ray gave a great example, right, of how we may initially just kind of go to assumptions, right? So think about your biases and think about how they're showing up in your life and how they may be preventing connections with other people. Next, we want to walk in the shoes of others, right? We want to understand what it's like for people in other situations, right? How do they live? What does their work life look like? How do they spend time with others? And understand their worries and concerns, understand their dreams and passions, right? Next, we want to have difficult conversations. Yes. We want to listen without interrupting and without casting judgment. We want to be open to different ideas. It doesn't mean that what you think is wrong. It simply means that this is their experience and that you too can take something from it if you choose, right? You want to apologize if you hurt someone's feelings by not understanding their lived experience, right? And talk through those difficult times or that difficult experience. Lastly, think about joining a cause or something like a shared cause, something that you are able to kind of work with these individuals outside of your culture, where you all can work together as a community and create like different projects and heal various differences within the community, or continue to remove these biases, right? So you can find like a community project. You can join each other through, again, similar life experiences. So although we may not look the same, if we are humans, we are having some similar experiences that we can talk about. And real quick, I want you all to read outside of experiences that you've never thought about, right? That you've never considered. Read widely, read fiction, read nonfiction, and just be willing to speak and understand things outside of your own worldview.
Dr. Anderson, that was great, and I think it was very helpful, especially to me. I've learned a couple of things. But Dr. Anderson, I want to take a quick break, but when we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about how we apply empathy in our everyday lives, specifically how we apply it in the workplace. And so we'll be right back after this quick break, and let's jump back into it.
We know how to treat the colds and the coughs. We know how to treat the bumps and the bruises, the cuts and fractures. But how do we treat, I can't afford a day off work to see a doctor? How do we treat, I've never had a doctor who speaks my language? How do we treat, I don't know how to connect with some of my patients? How do we treat, you're not listening? We can't treat what we cannot see. So we have to look closer and see what we're missing. People, patients, misdiagnosed, misunderstood, overlooked. These are the people left out of a system charged with helping them. And it's up to us to find them in our communities, in our relationships, in our data. We're meeting them where they are, discovering who they are. We're taking an honest look to understand their healthcare needs and delivering effective ways to reach them. We don't have all the answers, but together we can find the way to address the gaps in our healthcare system, to provide something better, to find more chances to save more lives. It won't be easy, but we can help make it right, because no one should be missed.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back to Healthy Doses. We are having such a great conversation on empathy. I really hope that we're answering some questions. We're highlighting, because I know I'm learning a lot, and I just hope that you guys are as well. Dr. Anderson, before we left, I talked about moving the conversation into how we can apply the lesson of empathy to the workplace. How can we use empathy to kind of benefit and kind of improve our lives mentally when we go to work every day?
Yeah, great question. So what we see a lot of times is that when folks are in positions of kind of leadership, right, authority, supervisor, boss, right, I'm going to kind of lean towards that, because that's usually where empathy is needed the most. We can talk about the coworkers, and I gave an example of earlier, right? When you see an overworked or overwhelmed coworker and how you show up, you can bring them coffee, you can sit with them, talk with them, or even lend a hand if you know what they're working on, right? Uh, in regards to leaders in the workplace, oftentimes we assume that uh, it's about like the job. Like if we just kind of knock out the job, everyone's happy, right? What we're finding through the research is no, that's not our reality. That empathy is one of the biggest influences or influencers of one's connectivity to the job, one's excitability to the job, right? Their willingness to stay. It is about a leader that is empathetic, right? And so we're finding that the ability of a leader to be empathetic and compassionate has the greatest impact on organizational profitability and productivity. So I want us to hear that. It is about a leader that is empathetic, a leader that is able to feel the emotions of their employees, a leader that is able to make strong and good connections with their employees, really helps with these individuals feeling excited about the job, their willingness to not only do the job, but maybe go above and beyond if that is something that they want to do or feel um, or have a desire to do, right? And so we really want to encourage authority figures and leaders in various positions, right, to lead with the empathetic hand, because that is showing what creates and increases profitability within the workplace.
But Dr. Anderson, that's very interesting that you say that, because while you were talking, I was thinking about
Mhm.
great leaders that I've read about, great leaders that I know, and one a common trait between all of those leaders is usually
Mm,
uh, they've been through, they worked their way from the bottom. They were sweeping floors or in the mailroom and kind of climbed. So in theory, they should have the greatest empathy of all, because they've literally been through all those steps. When I think about like athletics, because I always got to bring it back to sports. But the
right.
greatest coaches I had were players, because they
Mm,
understood what it took and what the players go through. Not to say that if you didn't play the game, you can't be a great coach, but there's a certain thing about understanding what the player is going through, things that you say or don't understand. And that's the same with leadership. Like there's things that you only get by going through the grind and being able to apply that. So when you are in a place of leadership, you can empathize and kind of reflect back and know exactly what your team is going through, and being able to help and provide in ways that you might not understand or might not even see coming. And so I think that was really cool just to kind of hear, because, in theory, great leaders have already been through it. They understand it and can put themselves in your place and know exactly what's needed for the team to be most effective. And so I think that's really cool.
I think that's a great point, because it is a unique connection that you have in anything you do, right? Where you've done it first, and then you're in a position to help and build other people, right? And so for me, who's been in school forever, working,
Doctor.
working with other students as a professor, right? When I was teaching, that empathy, I understood it because I knew, like you said, the grind. I knew the grind. I knew that even your best doesn't always translate on paper at the time, right? And so being empathetic, giving second chances, giving extended deadlines, all of those things, because I knew that it is difficult and it is a hard thing to do, along with juggling other lives, transitions and expectations, right? And so that is just a great example for that. What we are seeing, Ray, is that everyone doesn't come from the bottom. Everyone doesn't have those shared lived experiences, right, with their employees. So I'm going to give just a few ways to kind of build an empathetic leader real quick, okay? Just for those that still are working in that area, right? And so, number one, you really want to listen to your employees, right? You want to consciously make an effort about their ideas and their suggestions. You want to start understanding the meaning of what they're saying, right? When they say, I'm exhausted, or when they say, let's consider blah, 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 you should, in many ways, have an idea of like, oh, that means he or she is suggesting this, or asking those questions, right? And so the listening is so important. You want to make those connections. You want to ask, like, for certain buzzwords, like, if you come up to me and you say this, or I've heard this before from previous conversations, and I recognize that you may be in need of this, right? So simply listening. Next, you want to get to know them. This sounds simple, but this does not happen in every workplace. You want to get to know who you're working with. You want to get to know who you're supervising. You want to get to know who's keeping your company afloat. Amen. You want to get to know these human beings that are providing their sweat and their tears and their time and their commitment in your dream. You want to get to know them. You want to have boundaries, right? We always have boundaries. But you want to just connect to their feelings. You want to know things about their family, about what they like, about what they enjoy, their children, whatever they're willing to share, right? We want to open that up and connect with the people that work with you and for you. You want to consider other perspectives, right? You may be in charge. That does not mean other individuals' perspectives cannot help and cannot continue to build upon this dream, right? So you want to look at things from multiple angles. You want to practice these kind of healthy emotions. And you want to think from all sides of a disagreement or an argument before having an opinion. And you don't want to just jump to it. You want to consider all angles, because, again, that's how we show empathy to different folks throughout the not only the workday, right, but throughout the entire kind of culture of the workplace. You don't want to kind of show up in a state of like assumptions, like Ray talked about earlier, but you really want to consider things from all angles. And lastly, you want to educate yourself, right? I don't know if you need additional training. I don't know if all of you as a workspace need additional training, kind of creating a emotionally safe environment. But you want to have other experiences and connections to help you learn how to understand the other person and the skills you need to learn to focus on being a better leader.
Dr. Anderson, this has been such a great conversation, and it's really getting the audience to kind of get involved. And so there are some questions coming in. I want to jump over to those, but I do want to remind you that if you do have questions, send them in right now. We're watching the channel, and we want to try to get to as many as we can. So if you have any questions, scan that QR code, check the comment sections. I dropped a link in there. So if you're on your phone, you can access it that way. But we want to hear from you. And so, Dr. Anderson, the first question that I have in front of me is how important is it to distinguish your own emotions to be more empathetic?
How important it is to distinguish your own emotions from someone else's emotions?
Yes.
Great question. It's very important. It's very important because you don't want to, and this is the thing, and I know this personally by being a therapist, because being empathetic also leaves room for you to take on the emotions, carry them as if they're your own, right? So how important is it? Extremely important, because for folks that are empaths, extremely empathetic, whatever language you want to give it, when you take on the emotions of someone else, sometimes you can create a lack of boundaries within yourself around what are my emotions and what is this other person's emotions, right? And so when you find yourself doing that or carrying that, again, something personally that I had to work on, you ask yourself, right, before this conversation, how was I feeling? What emotions did I potentially take on that are not my own? Because it's fine to be able to, again, empathize. It's beautiful to be able to connect with someone emotionally, right? But we're not asking you to then take them on and carry them as your own burden. That is not the responsibility that we are asking of you or anyone else. It is just simply to connect in that moment. You don't have to save them, right? You don't even have to figure it out. All instances, we talked about the 3 types. Remember, you may just be in the first type where you're just cognitively understanding their perspective. You may not be in a space where you can show up as the compassionate one at the end, right? Where you don't only feel it, understand it, but you try to ease their distress. It's not one better than the other. Recognize that. Some may simply be, I'm here to talk. And so just know your limits, know your boundaries. But essentially, it is simply as human beings, we are emotionally able to connect. Some can do that more than others. If you are a person that does that more than others, it's very, very important that you're able to decipher between your own emotions and their emotions, and that you don't take it on as your own, because that's an entirely different conversation that I may be able to kind of get to, but I just want to kind of first say that you can connect without taking on the burden. I hope that helps.
I think so, Dr. Anderson. I want to throw in one of my own questions. I'm taking moderator privilege here because you said something that triggered. You mentioned the word empath, and that was something that I wanted to bring up in today's show because, like you said, I've been down the empath. I've done the research, the Google searches, and that comes up a lot when you discuss or when you're looking through empathy. And there's a lot of wild stances when you come to empaths. But there's a lot of practical and real connection to that word. And so I guess I kind of want to ask you, what are some of the facts surrounding being an empath? That's one of these triggers, one of these hot topics that are going out there. What is an empath in regards to this conversation?
Yeah, and I haven't personally, and I think it may even be a benefit for myself to maybe like dig extremely. I don't know if it'll be too much of a benefit because I'm already very connected emotionally. But empaths, from my understanding, and again, there's more research about it and all those things, are individuals that tend to absorb the emotion and feelings of others. So these individuals are generally extremely like fine-tuned to feel everything. As I'm reading as I was reading and like doing more research, it was like, ooh, this sounds like me. um, so sometimes it's a little bit too much, right? That's why I say whoever asked that question that was a beautiful question. It is sometimes too much. So by having this trait, or, whatever we want to kind of identify it as, but oftentimes it is a trait. Maybe a lot of research says genetic trait. This individual can create like a deep emotional connection with people, but sometimes it can be harmful depending on the type of people they're surrounded by. So it's this dark side of empathy, believe it or not. A saying that I say, too much of anything is too much. Too much of anything is too much. Life is always about balance. And so the dark side of empathy, if you will, or empaths, or, it's all connected, is that if you are surrounded by folks that recognize your gift, folks that recognize that you're very quickly to show up for them and kind of pour out to them, you may attract folks that are taking more than giving. Yeah. And so I think you asked this earlier, Ray, and I'm glad I'm even coming back to thinking about it. I think you said, what is too much? Like, when is it harmful? This is a great example of when it's harmful. When you are giving more than you have to give, when folks are taking advantage of your kindness, when they're taking advantage of, to me, it kind of is like a spiritual kind of connection, one of like giving and feeling, and being able to kind of show up for you. When you have individuals around you that do that, it makes being emotionally connected feel like a bad thing. Or that one, you can't fully live in your gift because others are going to kind of exploit it, and so my encouragement to those individuals and myself is to be very specific about who you let close to you, who you truly let in your circle, because I don't have to know everyone that I'm kind to or that I show up for. Sometimes it's just in that moment. You know what I mean? That doesn't mean they're my friend or my closest confidant. That doesn't mean that. That just means that, oh, I feel their pain. Maybe I can help them in this moment. Or, oh, I feel their pain. Let me give them some encouraging words. Or, oh, right. But the folks that you surround yourself with, make sure that there's reciprocity in those relationships, because the dark side of being an empath or being one of empathy is that folks can take until you are depleted.
Yes, and then kind of that to add on, you pulled from the pre-show conversation, but it stemmed right into what I was going to pull into next, was how much empathy is too much empathy, and kind of just going off of what you were talking about, and the definitions of empath, of being able to absorb the emotion around you, whether you want to or not. I think that's the biggest part about being an empath. Yes. And not saying that everybody, other people can't, but it hits you a lot, whether you're just overhearing a conversation or just sensing or in the conversation, it becomes an overload. And so now that becomes a conversation that we can definitely dive into in a future show, but protecting your peace, how can you not absorb this if you don't have to, right? This person's over here is, being wild and going angry, and you're feeling it. And it's like a lot of angry. And so that's kind of where we get. And then also the experience of, when you're overthinking things, right? Empathy, if I say this, they're going to feel like this. I remember somebody said that to me, and it made me feel this way. I don't want them to feel that way. And then you got to go into this whole thing that stops you from, or at least makes you hesitate on, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish. And so I think that's kind of important for this conversation too. If, empathy, you can have too much, and you got to find your balance and kind of got to figure out how to control it. Yeah. Dr. Anderson, I don't think I have any more questions coming in. Do you want to close us out? Any final thoughts on today's topic?
Yeah, I always enjoy this show, and the work that we do. As we kind of dug more into it, I realized the work that a lot of the work that we're constantly doing to protect, like you said, our peace, but also protect ourselves and our spiritual gifts. And so that kind of came up for me when I was thinking about like, ooh, the folks that all of us, many of us that are still dealing with overload, like emotional overload while managing healthy relationships and trying to give what we can to those that are in need. Like it is just such a balancing act all the time. I think if we come from a place of intention, from a place of protecting ourselves, it will always lend a positive outcome for us, because ultimately our goal, and I'm closing out the show as I say this, ultimately our goal is to prioritize ourselves, but also protect ourselves. Because something I learned the hard way is that no one's going to show up for us. Yeah. No one, and that's not their responsibility. It's our responsibility to show up for ourselves. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so despite our gifts, despite how connected we are emotionally to others, please pour into yourself first. Please prioritize yourself and what you need first, because that's the only way you can get from a place of intention or overflow or abundance, right? Is if you have already given yourself what you need first, right? And so in regards to the show, in regards to this topic, number one, I recognize that the world can benefit from more people that are empathetic with others, but I also recognize how can be difficult for us to show up in vulnerable spaces with folks that may not understand our stories, with folks that may not empathize with our stories, right? And so thinking about that, considering that, again, encourages us to still stay in our gifts, encourages us to help where we can, but also not burden ourselves with the emotions of others. We can feel them, we can experience them, but that doesn't mean that they are our own. So too much of anything is too much, right? So I want us to take from this show the importance of showing up for others, the importance of being able to connect cognitively with someone through their perspective, being able to emotionally connect, right, through their affect, and showing up if you're in a position to help them through their times of affliction or distress. Right? But always know you cannot pour from an empty cup. Always know that you are enough and what you give is enough, and recognize that your spiritual gifts are to be used in the best manner, and that if you feel anyone's kind of objectifying that or exploiting that you take care of yourself and guard your own heart, and recognize when you need to pull back from unhealthy relationships. So thank you all for joining us this Saturday. We will be back next week, and we'll be covering authenticity. You have a great, great weekend.
For more than 40 years, Boston Scientific has relied on our spirit of relentless innovation to advance science for life. We have the privilege and responsibility to deliver higher quality, less invasive, and more accessible device solutions, and the need has never been greater. Boston Scientific technologies are used to treat roughly 30 million patients around the world each year. Across our business, our products are supported by vast clinical data, including bench testing, randomized controlled trials, and ongoing real-world evidence to ensure the highest quality products make it into the hands of our customers. And we're always looking for ways to provide even more effective therapies and solutions. We invest over $1 billion annually in research and development to sustain a robust pipeline of meaningful innovations. We continuously strengthen our manufacturing and operations capabilities with artificial intelligence and advanced microelectronics to create devices that are smaller and smarter. And we're collaborating with our medical partners and physicians to advance digital capabilities with remote device support and a broad scope of training and education programs. Advancing science for life is also about supporting our employees and the communities in which we operate. Now more than ever, we rely on our values to guide our company as a global business and as a global corporate citizen. We're working to help confront healthcare inequities and social injustice not only with financial contributions, but through volunteer service, advocacy, and expanding market accessibility. We're also focused on environmental initiatives that move us towards our goal of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. The unmet needs are great, but the future of healthcare is bright. Our innovation centers provide a place to explore opportunities, examine solutions, and see what lies ahead for medicine. Together, we can continue the relentless pursuit of innovation to help everyone live longer, healthier lives and make a difference all over the world.